My life for 15 years was anchored by a single, profound act of love and sacrifice, raising my niece, Lily, as my own daughter. She was the light of my life, the vibrant, witty, and fiercely intelligent teenager who called me Mom. The fact that I wasn't her biological mother was a footnote, a painful secret I shared only with my husband, David, and the ghost of my sister, Clara. Clara, my younger sister, was a hurricane of a human being, brilliant, chaotic, and heartbreakingly fragile. She struggled with addiction and instability for most of her adult life. 15 years ago, she showed up on my doorstep, terrified and malnourished, holding a newborn baby girl she named Lily. "I can't do this, Sarah," Clara wept, pressing the tiny bundle into my arms. "I can't be a mother." "Not now, maybe not ever. Please, just for a while." The while lasted only 6 months. Clara tragically overdosed in a motel room several states away. Lily was officially placed in my custody. The police report listed the father as unknown, and Clara had never spoken his name, even to me. David, my steady, logical husband, had been skeptical at first. He was a successful architect, meticulous about planning and order. A baby, especially one born of Clara's chaos, was not in our 5-year plan. "We need to be realistic, Sarah. Her father could show up. This isn't our child," he cautioned, but I convinced him. I loved Lily instantly, fiercely, and I couldn't bear the thought of my sister's child entering the foster care system. David eventually succumbed to the sheer joy Lily brought to our sterile, organized home. We moved to a new neighborhood, told people we had adopted, and built a perfect life around our perfect daughter. David was a wonderful father. He taught her how to build birdhouses, helped her with geometry, and attended every one of her soccer games, always cheering the loudest. Our marriage, solid and built on mutual respect and shared interests, deepened with the presence of Lily. We were a unit, a happy, unbreakable family. The secret, that I was her aunt, not her mother, was the one point of vulnerability. David and I made a pact. We would tell Lily the truth when she turned 18, when she was emotionally mature enough to handle the complexity of her origins and the tragedy of her biological mother's life. Life continued in this cocoon of intentional deception. Lily grew into a beautiful, empathetic girl. We celebrated her 15th birthday last spring. The looming deadline of her 18th birthday, the day we would reveal the secret, often gave me a quiet dread, but I knew David and I would face it together. The crack in our foundation began subtly, a tiny tremor I initially dismissed as marital fatigue. David started traveling more frequently for work. Trips that used to last 3 days suddenly stretched to a week. His explanations were plausible. New clients, international projects. But his once meticulous communication became vague and sporadic. He grew distant, physically and emotionally. I attributed it to stress. The anniversary of Clara's death was approaching, and the pressure of the impending revelation to Lily was certainly weighing on both of us. Then, David began working from his home office behind a locked door, something he had never done. His cheerful ringtone was replaced by a sterile, silent vibrating. The real breakthrough came 2 months ago. David had flown to San Francisco for a week-long conference. Lily was preparing for a history project, and she asked me if there were any old family photos of Clara she could use. I went to the basement to retrieve the old photo albums. I hadn't looked at them in years. They contained the history David and I had carefully curated. our wedding, our travels, and the entire beautiful life of Lily. As I was sorting through a box of old papers, I found an unmarked folder tucked beneath a pile of tax returns. Inside, there wasn't a tax form. There were medical records. They weren't mine, and they weren't David's. They were a stack of documents from a high-end fertility clinic dated 16 years ago, a year before Lily was born. The documents detailed David's fertility testing. The diagnosis was clear and definitive, typed in bold black letters: azoospermia, complete infertility. I froze. The air knocked out of my lungs. David was sterile. He knew this before Lily was born. My mind instantly cycled back to our early attempts to conceive, which had been quickly abandoned. David had always been vague about his health, claiming it was my problem that we couldn't conceive. He had convinced me to stop trying, saying adoption was the best path anyway. The full, horrifying implication hit me like a physical blow. David couldn't have fathered Lily. That much I knew. But why hide the infertility? Why let me shoulder the blame for our childlessness? And why keep these old records tucked away like a guilty secret? A secret that contradicted the carefully constructed narrative of our shared life. I put the infertility papers back and continued searching. That's when I found the second folder. It was thinner, wrapped with a rubber band. Inside was a single folded paternity test result from a lab in a different state, dated shortly after Lily came into our care. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. The names were listed: Lily Thompson, her mother, Clara, listed under a pseudonym, and the alleged father. The alleged father was not David. The alleged father was a man named Robert Vance. And next to Robert Vance's name, the results screamed the truth. 99.999% probability of paternity, my sister's child, my husband's sterility, and a random man named Robert Vance. The pieces were too fragmented, too impossible to assemble. But then I saw the signature on the authorization line of the test request. It wasn't Clara's. It wasn't mine. It was David's. David had secretly ordered and paid for a paternity test on Lily 15 years ago. David knew who Lily's father was, and he had kept that name hidden from me for 15 years, letting me believe the father was unknown. The realization was a knife to the heart. The deception wasn't just about my sister's tragedy. It was a deliberate two-pronged lie orchestrated by my husband. He knew he couldn't have children, and he knew who Lily's father was. Why did he hide the father's identity? Why the desperate secrecy? I was no longer mourning my sister. I was preparing for a brutal confrontation with the man I thought I knew. David returned from San Francisco the next day, cheerfully kissing Lily hello and handing me a small, generic gift. He settled back into his routine, locking himself in his office, oblivious to the fact that I held two pieces of paper that could incinerate our 15-year marriage. I didn't confront him immediately. I needed to understand the why. David wasn't cruel. He was merely cautious and highly protective of his image. Why hide the infertility? Shame, perhaps. Why hide the father's name? That was the deeply unnerving part. I started by tackling the easier secret, the infertility. David was a successful man who valued control. Admitting a biological failing like azoospermia would have been devastating to his masculine pride and his carefully constructed persona of success. He had let me believe I was the issue, maintaining his perfect exterior while sacrificing my peace of mind. The second secret, Robert Vance, was far more complex. Why did David, the man who had reluctantly agreed to raise Lily, pay for a paternity test and then intentionally hide the results? Using my network, the benefit of having worked in hospital administration before I became a stay-at-home mom, I ran a discreet search on the name Robert Vance in the state where the test was conducted. The results were vague at first, but with a bit of cross-referencing against Clara's timeline, I found him. Robert Vance, a former colleague of David's from his first architecture firm 15 years ago. A man David had introduced me to briefly at a Christmas party, a man who had quickly moved out of the city shortly after. My blood ran cold. The man was a ghost in my memory, but he was a firm fixture in David's past. I found Robert Vance's LinkedIn profile. He was now a partner at a prominent firm in Chicago. His profile photo looked eerily familiar. The same sharp jawline, the same intense eyes, the same strong brow that Lily possessed. The resemblance was undeniable once I looked for it. I now had two key pieces of information. David knew Robert Vance. Robert Vance was Lily's biological father. The theory I had been avoiding for 15 years slammed into me with the force of an avalanche. Clara's pregnancy was not an anonymous mistake. It was a connection, possibly a fling, with a man David knew well. I remembered the time Clara stayed with us for a few weeks, months before she announced the pregnancy. David and Robert Vance had been working on a major project together. Were they hanging out outside of work? Did David introduce them? Did Clara and Robert have a brief, destructive affair right under my nose? If David knew Robert Vance was the father, why the elaborate cover-up? I found my answer tucked into the same unmarked folder as the paternity results, a copy of an old, unsigned legal document. It was a waiver of parental rights form, drafted by a lawyer in that same city, naming Robert Vance and Clara. The terms were chillingly precise. Robert Vance would forfeit all parental rights, financial obligations, and future contact in exchange for a substantial one-time payment. The payment amount was redacted, but the date was crucial. The form was drafted just 2 weeks after Lily was born, and the paternity test was clearly a prerequisite for the waiver. I realized the monstrous scale of David's deception. He didn't just hide the father's name, he paid the father off to disappear, and then lied to me for 15 years about the unknown father. But why go to such lengths? Why pay off a man to legally erase himself from his daughter's life, only to turn around and claim that same child as his own? The answer came to me with a sick clarity, linking back to the infertility papers. David was sterile. The man obsessed with legacy, with his perfect ordered life, could not produce an heir. When Clara showed up with Lily, David saw a perfect ready-made solution, a baby with my family's DNA, eliminating the messy, embarrassing process of adoption and eliminating the risk of a biological father ever resurfacing. He hadn't agreed to raise Lily out of reluctant love. He had agreed out of calculated self-interest. He had bought a family. I sat there looking at the assembled evidence, the infertility documents, proof he knew he couldn't be a father, the paternity test, proof he knew who was, and the waiver, proof he had purchased Lily's privacy. When David finally emerged from his office that evening, he looked tired, but relieved, the usual post-trip exhaustion. He walked past me, heading for the kitchen. "I need to talk to you, David," I said, my voice low and steady, stripped of all emotion. He stopped, sensing the temperature drop in the room. "Sarah? What is it? You seem upset." I placed the 3 pieces of paper, the azoospermia diagnosis, the Robert Vance paternity test, and the waiver document on the kitchen counter, neatly side by side. Upset is an understatement, David. I've found a fraud. A 15-year-old life-destroying fraud. Sit down. We need to talk about why you bought our daughter. His face drained of color, going from a slight flush to a mottled white. He looked at the documents, then at me. The silence was the kind that suffocates. I was going to tell you, he finally whispered. The classic coward's defense. I just needed the right time. 15 years wasn't enough time, David? Letting me believe I was infertile wasn't enough time? Paying off Lily's biological father and lying about it wasn't enough time? I challenged him, the coldness in my voice finally breaking into a fierce tremor. Start talking, David. Tell me the full extent of this monstrous lie. David sat at the kitchen counter, head in his hands, completely broken. The meticulously controlled architect, the pillar of my life, was reduced to a weeping, guilty man. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, Sarah. I love Lily. I love our life, he pleaded, his voice thick with tears. Don't talk about love, David. Talk about the lies, I demanded, pointing to the infertility papers. Why did you hide the azoospermia? Why let me believe our inability to conceive was my fault? He wouldn't meet my eyes. It was shame, Sarah. Pure, selfish shame. I couldn't bear the thought of admitting a failure of that magnitude. I built my career on perfection, on being able to create something out of nothing. To admit I couldn't even fulfill a basic biological function. It was easier to let you stop trying. The clarity of his selfishness was staggering. But the second lie, the cover-up of Robert Vance, was the true betrayal of our shared parental bond. Tell me about Robert Vance. Tell me about the paternity test and the waiver. You knew who the father was from the start, didn't you? He took a shaky breath. I knew Robert from my firm. He was a bright kid, and I mentored him. That night you mentioned, when Clara stayed with us for a few weeks, Robert was working late on a project at our house. Clara, she was always drawn to complicated people. They had a brief fling, a few nights. She swore me to secrecy, begging me not to tell you because she knew you wouldn't approve of Robert. He was already married, Sarah. My world tilted again. Married. Robert Vance was married, and my sister had knowingly been the other woman, concealing the father's identity to protect his marriage, not just out of shame for her own chaos. When Clara showed up on our doorstep with Lily, David continued, his words rushing out now, a painful torrent of confession. I knew I had to act fast. Clara was unstable. Robert Vance was moving out of state and wanted no part of the mess. He was terrified his wife would find out and ruin his own promising career. And you saw an opportunity, I finished for him, the disgust rising in my throat. He nodded miserably. I saw a way to stabilize the situation. Clara was going to give Lily up anyway. I couldn't have a child biologically. Lily had your family's DNA. She was a perfect fit. I approached Robert with a proposition. I would pay him a large sum, enough to secure his silence and his wife's ignorance, if he signed a full, irrevocable waiver of all parental rights. He took the money and vanished. How large a sum, David? Enough to pay for a down payment on a house in Chicago. It was substantial. He had literally bought my sister's baby and silenced the biological father, all without my knowledge. And the ultimate reason, David? Why the monstrous deception? He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. Because I loved you, Sarah, and I loved Lily. And I was terrified that if I told you the truth, that I was sterile, that I had paid off the father, that I had orchestrated the whole thing, you would leave me, and I would lose the only chance I had to be a father. I created a controlled environment where I could finally have the perfect family, the one thing my own body couldn't provide. He had prioritized his desire for a perfect family over my right to informed consent, over my right to grieve my infertility, and over the truth of my sister's messy, tragic life. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. The love and respect I had built my life on vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, searing resentment. You didn't create a perfect family, David. You created a perfect lie and condemned me to live inside it. You protected your image, protected Robert Vance's marriage, and protected your pride. You didn't protect me, and you certainly didn't protect the truth. That night, I moved into the guest room. The silence between us was heavy with the weight of 15 years of deception. My immediate focus shifted from anger to strategy. Lily was 15, a smart, emotional teenager. Telling her the truth now that the man she called Dad was sterile, that her real father was a married man who abandoned her for cash, and that I was actually her aunt, would destroy her. David's deception had stolen my ability to control the timing of the revelation, the one thing I had promised Clara I would handle with care. I confronted David the next day, not as a wife, but as an opponent. "We will file for divorce," I stated, my voice clinical. "But this is how it will happen. You will claim the divorce is amicable due to irreconcilable differences. We will continue to co-parent Lily exactly as we have been. You will remain Dad until she is 18, when we will tell her the truth together. The only difference is that you will move out, and you will pay every penny of the support I ask for, because your deception warrants it." David, terrified of losing Lily entirely and of the truth of the paternity waiver becoming public, readily agreed. His weakness was finally my strength. But the most difficult part of the arrangement was yet to come. I had a name, Robert Vance, and a child, and a 15-year-old pact with a dead sister. I knew that before I could fully move on, I needed to know if Robert Vance had honored the deal or if he posed a future threat to the peace I was desperately trying to secure for Lily. The man who sold his daughter needed to be checked on, just one last time. The divorce from David was a surgical procedure, precise, calculated, and devoid of emotion. We both retained high-profile lawyers who understood the necessity of discretion. The settlement was generous. David, burdened by guilt and the threat of exposure, paid out a large sum, securing my and Lily's financial future. He moved into a minimalist apartment downtown, maintaining his image as the focused architect, while his visits to Lily remained constant, structured, and entirely normal. We had bought ourselves time. 2 years remained until Lily's 18th birthday, the deadline we had set to reveal the truth. However, the clock was ticking louder than ever. The pressure of knowing the full destructive truth, my sterility, David's deception, and Robert Vance's calculated abandonment was nearly unbearable. The one variable I couldn't control was Robert Vance, the man who sold his paternal rights for a down payment on a house. I needed to know if he was still a ghost or if he was a potential threat. I hired a private investigator, a former colleague from my hospital days who specialized in finding difficult-to-locate individuals. My instructions were simple. Find Robert Vance, confirm his marital status, and ensure he had honored the waiver of parental rights. The report came back a month later, heavy with information. Robert Vance was indeed a success. He was now a partner at a prestigious firm in Chicago, living the opulent life David had helped him secure. He was married to the same woman he was with 15 years ago, the woman whose ignorance David had deemed more important than my truth. They had 2 young children, a boy and a girl. Robert Vance had his perfect controlled family, bought at the expense of his firstborn daughter and my life. The most crucial piece of information was that Robert Vance had upheld the waiver. There was no record of any contact with Lily, no financial support, and no public acknowledgement of her existence. He was a perfect ghost. He had taken David's money and erased Lily completely from his narrative. This confirmation brought a strange, heavy relief. The legal threat was contained. The moral injury, however, was deepened. Lily was not just abandoned, she was sold by her biological father and bought by her non-biological father. The investigation also uncovered one final devastating detail about Clara, my sister. Robert Vance's marriage was not a secret to everyone. Robert's wife, a woman named Jennifer, was David's college contemporary. They had been friends. I realized with a sickening clarity that David hadn't just known Robert Vance. David had been protecting his friend's marriage from the fallout of Clara's pregnancy. The initial lie wasn't just about his own shame, it was a layered defense of his social circle and his reputation. David hadn't chosen me over his pride, he had chosen his social standing over my truth. The distance between David and me, though now physical, was also defined by this insurmountable moral canyon. When he visited Lily, he was still the doting, patient father. But when he looked at me, his eyes held the weight of his guilt and the terror of the impending deadline. I started preparing for Lily's 18th birthday meticulously. I gathered all the documents, the old letters from Clara, the legal adoption papers, which we had obtained after Clara's death, and the infertility records. I even contacted a specialized family therapist to guide us through the revelation process. I knew I couldn't protect Lily from the pain of the revelation, but I could protect her from the lie itself. I decided to frame the truth not as a story of betrayal, but as a story of unconditional love and radical choice. I planned to tell her this: your biological mother loved you so much, she gave you the safest, best chance at life. And your biological father made a choice to protect his other family. But David and I chose you every single day, knowing every complication. And that choice is what makes us your true parents. David, though reluctant, was forced to participate in the therapeutic preparations. During one session, the therapist asked him to articulate why he finally felt ready to tell Lily the truth. David looked at me, then at his hands. Because the lie has become heavier than the truth, doctor. It's smothering her mother. And I can't live with the fact that I stole Sarah's peace of mind to protect my own pride. I owe her the ending of this lie. It was the closest he had ever come to a genuine, selfless apology. It was too late to save our marriage, but perhaps not too late to save his relationship with Lily. As Lily's 18th birthday approached, the tension became almost unbearable. She sensed the change in the atmosphere, the whispered calls, the secretive meetings. She started asking more piercing questions about her birth mother, Clara, and her unknown father. "Mom," she asked one night, her voice tentative, "did my birth father leave because I was a bad baby?" I hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. "No, darling. He left because he was a man who didn't understand the depth of love he had created. He left because he was weak, not because you were anything less than perfect. I knew the conversation on her 18th birthday would change everything. It would shatter the safe, simple world she believed in, but it would also empower her with her own true story. The 15-year mark of the deception was over, but the final, most defining chapter was about to begin. The morning of Lily's 18th birthday was quiet and heavy. We started the day with tradition, pancakes, a small cake, and a flood of gifts. David was there, looking pale and formal. We managed the initial celebration with forced smiles, but the air thrummed with the unspoken truth waiting to be released. Later that afternoon, we sat Lily down in the living room, the same room where David and I had made the initial pact 15 years ago. The family therapist was present, a silent, steady anchor. "Lily, sweetheart," I began, my voice thick with emotion. "There is a truth about your life we promised ourselves we would tell you when you were ready, and today you are ready." David unexpectedly took the lead. He held Lily's hand, his eyes filled with genuine tears. "Lily, this is the hardest thing your mother and I have ever had to do. I want you to know this first. I love you more than anything in the world. Being your father is the greatest gift of my life." Then I delivered the parts of the truth we had carefully prepared. I started by explaining my sister Clara's immense love for her and the tragedy of her addiction. Then I revealed the first layer of the deception, that I was her biological aunt, and that we had chosen to raise her as our own to give her a stable life. Lily listened silently, her eyes wide, tears slowly tracking down her cheeks. "So, you're my aunt? And Clara was my mom? I always wondered why I looked so much like her old pictures." Then came the second, deeper layer, the part David had orchestrated. I presented the infertility diagnosis first. "David and I couldn't have children biologically, Lily. We wanted you so badly that when you came into our lives, we saw it as a miracle." David then had to confess the final, cruel truth about the paternity waiver. He told her that he knew her biological father, Robert Vance, and that Robert Vance had chosen not to be a part of her life, agreeing to waive his rights in exchange for a private life. He omitted the part about the money and Robert being married to protect Lily's initial emotional stability. Lily didn't scream or cry hysterically. Her reaction was a quiet, crushing fury directed entirely at David. "You lied to me for 15 years, she asked David, her voice shaking. "You didn't just hide who my father was. You paid him to disappear. You treated my life like a transaction. You said you loved me, but you chose to manage a secret instead of trusting me with the truth." She stood up, looking at the man who was legally and emotionally her father, but now felt like a stranger. "I don't care that I'm adopted. I care that you thought I was too weak or too stupid to handle the truth. That's the real betrayal. Dad." She stormed out, running to her room and slamming the door. The confrontation was devastating, but it had to happen. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. Lily refused to speak to David. She was angry at me for my complicity, but her rage was primarily focused on the man who had actively manufactured the lie. She read the documents I gave her, the adoption papers, the court records, but she refused to even look at the Robert Vance paternity test. "He's a ghost. I don't want his reality infecting mine," she declared. David was heartbroken. His forced absence brought the full cost of his deception into painful focus. He realized that the only thing holding his relationship with Lily together was her forgiveness, something he had to earn back slowly and honestly. As for Robert Vance, the biological father, Lily never contacted him. She chose to actively reject the man who had purchased his freedom from her. He remained a distant, successful ghost in Chicago, his life untouched by the daughter he abandoned. The true consequence, however, fell on David. Lily eventually allowed him back into her life, but the foundation of their relationship was irrevocably changed. The spontaneous affection was replaced by a quiet, conditional respect. He was forced to live out the rest of his life, knowing that his pride had cost him the unconditional love of his daughter, replacing it with conditional, hard-earned acceptance. I, too, found my freedom. The money David gave me allowed me to fund my own small, private foundation focused on helping children of addiction who had lost a parent. I channeled my grief and my anger into a positive legacy, honoring Clara's memory by helping others like her. 15 years ago, I started my journey by accepting a lie to save a child. Today, I was free because I chose to destroy that lie to save myself and to empower that same child with the most valuable gift of all, her own true story. My life with Lily was now imperfect, honest, and ours, built not on my husband's pride or my sister's tragedy, but on the enduring, chosen love of a mother and her daughter. Thank you for listening to this difficult confession. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments section below.